Hey there, I'm James. I'm a broadcast engineer by trade. I work at WBDK, a CBS station here in Atlanta, Georgia. I've got a fancy degree from MIT in electrical engineering and computer science, plus another in broadcast technologies. I've been in this field for 22 years, tackling some tough jobs before settling down here in Atlanta. For the last 5 years, I've moved around different TV stations along the East Coast. I'm 46 years old, got dark hair, stand 63 ba, and weigh about 190 pounds. People sometimes say I'm good looking, but I'm no TV star. I've been married to Emily for 22 years, and we have 2 daughters, Hannah and Ella. Hannah's already married, and Ella's about to finish college. Emily is around 55, weighs about 135 pounds, and has long blonde hair. She seems sweet on the outside, but appearances can be deceiving. She's been working as a secretary for our pastor, Reverend David Shelter, for the past year and a half. Let me tell you what happened last Friday. I had some extra time for lunch, so I thought I'd surprise Emily by taking her out. I parked by the side entrance of the church office to avoid the rain, hoping to get closer to the door. When I got there, I found Emily's office empty. Still, I went inside and waited. As I did, I overheard Emily talking to Pastor David in his office. She was excited about Monday night and mentioned how great it was that I work on the Monday night football games for the station because it gave them time together. She also asked about a reservation at the lodge. Pastor David reassured her, saying it was all set and that he'd booked the Whirlpool suite again. Then he told her to come over so he could show it to her. I heard the rustling of clothes followed by Emily's moans. I was stunned and felt a wave of nausea and anger. I knew I had to leave before I did something rash. The thought of barging in and confronting them crossed my mind, but I hesitated, knowing I might lose control and get physical given my emotional state. I was certain I'd end up kicking both of them if I did. However, I didn't want to face the fallout from my actions, so I made the tough decision to leave. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I wanted to explode, but instead walked away. I'm pretty sure neither of them noticed me or knew I had been there. The church had security cameras monitoring the main entrances, but I had come and gone through the side door without being seen. I was so shaken up that I knew I couldn't focus on work for the rest of the day. I called in, telling them I wasn't feeling well and needed to head home. I needed time to wrap my head around what I'd just discovered, and home seemed like the best place to do that. With Emily not coming home until after 4 p.m., I had a few hours to process everything. The awful truth hit me like a ton of bricks. Emily was having an affair with Pastor David. I couldn't see him as my pastor anymore. That much was clear. What I needed to figure out was how deep their relationship went, how long it had been happening, and why it even started. Some people might think it's best not to dig into the details, but I'm not one of them. I had to understand why this betrayal happened in what I thought was a perfect marriage. Apparently, in Emily's eyes, it was far from it. Emily wasn't the sweet person I thought she was, and I was hell-bent on finding out the truth. I wasn't going to roll over and take this. I was determined to get to the bottom of it and make sure they both faced the music. When I got home, I made a pot of coffee and went out to sit on the patio, hoping the fresh air would help clear my mind. I needed to make sense of the chaos in my head. I'll admit I shed a few tears that afternoon. It hurt deeply to think that Emily had broken our vows, being intimate with another man, maybe even more, when she had promised herself to me on our wedding day. Some might not take those vows seriously, but I did. And I believe she did too. This kind of betrayal makes you question everything you value and wonder if you've been naive to believe in faithfulness and love. Regardless of what people say, the most damaging part of a cheating partner isn't just the physical betrayal, it's the loss of trust. It's realizing that the person you thought had your back all these years really doesn't, leaving you feeling exposed and scared. Despite being 63 inches and 190 pounds, I felt vulnerable and frightened. It's a stark reminder of how deeply a cheating spouse can affect your emotional well-being. As I sat there battling my emotions, trying to stay calm and logical, I realized there were things I had questioned in the past, but let go of because of my trust in Emily. Little things that seemed insignificant at the time now formed a heavy lump in my stomach as I connected the dots. How could I have been so foolish? It was trust, plain and simple. I had placed my trust in her, and now that trust was shattered. What I needed were cold, hard facts. I wanted to know why this happened, how long it had been going on, how often, where, and if anyone else was involved. My trust had evaporated, and I was determined to find the answers I needed. As an update, I knew I couldn't face Emily just yet without revealing my feelings. So at 3 p.m., I decided to leave the house before she returned. I drove into town and stopped by the station to pick up a few things I'd need for the next couple of days. I popped into my boss's office and asked for a few days off early in the week, explaining that I was dealing with some personal issues and wasn't feeling well. He agreed to the time off, so I left and went to Charlie's to hang out until I needed to head home around 5 p.m. I called Emily to let her know I'd be out for a while and wouldn't make it home for dinner. She sounded a bit annoyed and mentioned that she was feeling amorous tonight, hinting that I'd be missing out on a treat. I told her to keep the mood hot for me and assured her I'd take care of her when I got back. She replied curtly, "Don't count on it, mister. If you think you can treat me like this, you won't be getting anything for a while." Deep down, I thought this was exactly what I wanted. I got home around 10:30 p.m., feeling quite tipsy but not so drunk that I missed the fact that the bedroom door was shut and locked. I couldn't help but smirk and knocked on the door, wondering if she was awake, though I doubted it. I shouted, "Fine, if this is the game you want to play, then don't expect any intimacy from me. Just deal with it." With that, I headed for the spare bedroom. The next morning when I got up, Emily was at the kitchen table sipping her coffee. I could tell her coffee had gotten a bit colder when I walked in. If I hadn't known about her infidelity, I might have sensed something was off. I gave her a polite smile and said, "No need to make breakfast, honey. I'll grab something on my way to the golf course." I then walked out of the kitchen, loaded my golf clubs into the trunk of my car, and drove off. Shortly after, my cell phone rang, and I saw it was Emily calling, so I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I got a beep indicating she'd left a message. I listened to it, and it was a fiery rant asking how I could do this to her and demanding I come back immediately. The truth was, I had no intention of going golfing. I was using that as an excuse to buy myself a few hours to sort out what I needed to. My real destination was my former church. I didn't want to hear David preach again, but I knew it was still early, so I hoped no one would be around. And I was right. I entered the building, using the key I still had since Emily worked there. I headed straight to the offices, aiming to set up remote micro cameras and mini microphones in both Emily's and David's offices. It didn't take long to get everything in place, and I hid the transmitter behind some old files in the supply closet across the hall. I had the receiver wired into my car's electrical system, so I could monitor their conversations and activities whenever they were in their offices. While I didn't expect much action at the church, I was confident that over the next few days, I'd gather some useful information by keeping an ear on them. Once I confirmed that everything was working correctly, I rummaged through Emily's desk but didn't find anything significant. However, I did notice a big asterisk on her calendar for Monday, which matched what I had overheard on Friday. I planned to be ready for whatever might go down that day. Next, I moved on to David's office and searched there. I didn't find anything incriminating at first, but just as I was about to give up, inspiration struck. It was ironic that it came in a church, but there it was, a thought to check the filing cabinets for church expense receipts. Sure enough, I found a file with several receipts from the lodge in Roswell. Some were from late 2019, and a few were from the spring of 2020. Realizing I was risking too much by staying too long, I quickly made copies of the receipts and tidied up before making my exit. My next move was to head to the golf course and park in my usual spot. I went to the clubhouse and headed straight for the bar. I wanted to make sure a few people noticed me there, so I found a table in the back and ordered a Sprite, spending a couple of hours scrutinizing the receipts. Upon examining them, I discovered that the 2 receipts from late 2019 were for Mondays, and the 2 from spring 2020 were on dates when I had been at a CBS conference in New York. What infuriated me the most was that David had the nerve to charge those motel rooms to the church, pretending they were for conference room rentals for meetings. He'd been sneaking around with my wife at a motel, and I'd been unwittingly paying for it while we contributed to the church. That was the final straw. I decided there would be no more donations from me. Their day of reckoning was approaching, and all I needed was a bit more evidence to seal their fate. I was convinced that this affair had been going on for almost a year, if not longer, which matched up with the suspicions I'd gathered earlier. My gut told me David had been involved with her even before she started working for him. Emily had a decent job as a receptionist at Telfer Corporation, but she eagerly accepted the church position, saying, "Honey, it's so close to home, and it's for the church. What could be better? Plus, the pay is almost the same as what I was making at Telfor. How can I pass this up?" It all sounded ideal, closer to home, working for the church, and nearly the same salary. But now it was clear she was more interested in the extra benefits. I couldn't believe how blind I had been. It made me both furious and sick to think my wife, whom I thought was loving and faithful, could betray me like this. I was determined to make them pay for their deceit. I decided it was time to do some serious digging. I went out to my car and hooked up my iPod to the receiver in the trunk. After sifting through a few minutes of data, I saw David enter his office. He picked up the phone and made a call. I regretted not having planted a bug on his phone, but that was a missed opportunity. Now I had to make do with overhearing just one side of the conversation. "Yeah, Emily, I'm at the church. I came right after your call. What's going on?" he said. I wondered if he'd done this sort of thing before. "I see. What do you think set him off?" Then he asked, "Do you think he's suspicious of anything?" Emily's response made him laugh, and he continued, "All right then, you can get back at him on Monday night." After the call ended, David sat there, lost in thought. Just as I was about to turn off the transmission, he muttered something almost inaudible. I managed to catch it and made sure to save the recording, knowing it could be useful later. After shutting down the equipment, I drove back home. Anticipating it might be a bit chilly, I decided to mow the lawn and tackle some chores in the basement. When I walked back inside, Emily didn't say much, but the tension was thick in the air. During dinner, I chose to ignore her completely, and she just sat there glaring at me. Eventually, she attempted to start a conversation, asking what had been bothering me and why I'd been acting so oddly. I reminded her that she had locked me out of our bedroom the night before and pointed out that I rarely went out with friends. The one time I did, she had become upset and made threats. I made it clear that her behavior was the root of the problem, not mine. In frustration, she responded with a curse word. I noted how her choice of language didn't match the behavior one would expect from a devout Christian, given her strong faith. Her reaction, with clear guilt on her face, showed that she knew I was onto her, even though she seemed to think I wouldn't notice. Still, she managed to regain her composure and left the table eventually. I told myself that when everything eventually came to light, she wouldn't handle it well. Later in the evening, she came into the family room where I was watching TV. Her eyes were slightly red, suggesting she might have been crying. The rest of the night passed without any major incidents. When it was time for bed, I walked down the hallway to the spare bedroom and got settled. A few minutes later, Emily came into the room and stood there. I asked, "What do you want?" She asked, "Aren't you coming to bed?" I replied, "Nope. You've made it clear there won't be any intimacy for a while, so I might as well get a good night's sleep alone in here." With that, she left the room in tears. Honestly, I didn't care. On Sunday morning, she woke me up at 8 a.m., dressed for church, and invited me to join her. I declined, saying I had no intention of going. She left the room with a look that suggested she was starting to grasp the gravity of the situation. Later, she headed out, and we barely spoke for the rest of the day, each of us retreating to our separate corners. On Monday morning, I left the house without crossing paths with her or engaging in any conversation. She called me, her voice trembling with tears, apologizing and expressing her love. I told her we'd sort everything out when I got back that evening and ended the call. Next, I contacted my boss to confirm my day off, but reassured him of my commitment to cover the Monday night football game. He was fine with my availability and asked how things were going. I told him things were proceeding as planned. My next stop was the Ladot Inn in Roswell. When I walked into the motel lobby, I made sure to look like just another guy doing his job. I noticed the clerk, a young guy named Ryan, seemed more interested in his phone than in what was happening around him. I approached him with a clipboard in hand. "Hey, got a service call for the Whirlpool suite," I said, tapping on a fake work order ID prepared. "There's a complaint about the AC making noise. You know how it is with this heat." Ryan gave the clipboard a quick glance, his brow furrowing slightly. I maintained a professional demeanor. "What room?" he asked, sounding a bit confused. I told him the suite number. For a moment I thought he might challenge me, but he just nodded, handed me the key card and said, "Make it quick, all right?" I was in the room in no time. Instead of carrying wrenches and gauges, I had my high-tech gear, microphones, cameras, you name it. While I was pretending to be a maintenance guy, I was actually setting up a sting operation to catch my wife in the act. Setting up the equipment was a breeze. I hid everything so well you wouldn't know it was there. I was out of the room as quickly as I had entered, giving Ryan a nod on my way out. "All set," I said. "No more noise from that AC." He barely looked up from his phone. I left feeling a bit like James Bond, if I'm being honest. Ryan had no clue, and I was one step closer to unraveling the truth about my wife. With plenty of time on my hands, I tackled a few other tasks I'd been putting off. First, I went to our bank and obtained cashier's checks for half the funds from both our checking and savings accounts. After that, I canceled our joint credit cards. Next, I contacted my broker and scheduled a meeting for just after lunch to make some adjustments to our investment accounts. I also reached out to my attorney to discuss the divorce and other legal matters. We set up an appointment for later that afternoon when he would be available. Then, I drove to Planters National Bank in Marietta, Georgia, where I opened new accounts in my name only and deposited the cashier's checks. I grabbed lunch in Marietta, though I wasn't really hungry. Afterward, I went to my broker's office to review the changes he had made to our investment portfolio. The adjustments split our investments evenly, without selling off any assets to avoid unnecessary tax implications. I took the paperwork with me and then met with my attorney to go over the divorce papers he had drafted. I suggested a no-fault divorce with an equal division of assets, provided my wife agreed to sign immediately. If she refused, I had him include a clause for filing based on adultery. I was pretty confident she'd sign without fuss. With everything squared away, all I had left to do was grab dinner and then head to the station for the Monday Night Football broadcast. After leaving my attorney's office, I turned on my cell phone and saw a couple of messages from Emily. In her texts, she expressed concern and asked me to come home before the game, saying my recent behavior was deeply troubling her. She professed her love and lamented how heartbroken she felt seeing me like this. Despite knowing her plans for the evening and being fully aware of the betrayal, she could still send these messages. It made me question my own judgment and wonder if I was the biggest fool ever for having loved and trusted her. I had come to a conclusion. The only chance to salvage my marriage rested on whether Emily would show up at the motel that night. Her decision would reveal if she truly cared enough to attempt to save our relationship, acknowledging how fragile it had become. At 8 p.m., I set up the system for fully automated recording and switched it to broadcast mode. Monday Night Football began, and I configured the system to monitor the feed from the motel room. At precisely 8:15, David entered the room and made a call. "Hey baby, I'm in the room, get over here as soon as you can," he said. Emily replied, "Okay honey, I'll be there in a few minutes." After ending the call, David muttered a few more words that I barely caught. I knew I would need to replay the audio later to get the full details. As Monday Night Football played on, my heart ached, knowing my marriage was disintegrating. Even though I hadn't expected Emily to end things, the pain was still crushing. This whole ordeal only strengthened my resolve to ensure they faced the consequences of their actions. I pulled out my contact list and spent nearly half an hour making calls. Meanwhile, Emily arrived at the motel, so I returned to monitoring the video and audio feed. The scene that unfolded was gut-wrenching. Emily's voice trembled with excitement as she said, "Oh God, David, the thought of being with you excites me so much. I really cherish these nights together." In response, David invited her closer, saying, "Tonight, darling, I'm going to fulfill your every desire." Emily's voice was filled with adoration as she said, "I love it when you talk to me so passionately." My heart sank, and a wave of nausea overwhelmed me. Here were a pastor, a church secretary, and my once sweet wife plunging into a dark abyss of depravity beyond my comprehension. In the moments that followed, I witnessed just how twisted their relationship had become. They both deserved the consequences that awaited them, and I had no doubt about it. Emily positioned herself on the bed, and I couldn't bring myself to describe what happened next. The person who had once been the love of my life was now a stranger in a scene of betrayal and heartbreak. He finished his act, and it became painfully clear that our future together was irreparably shattered. Despite the overwhelming agony, My burning anger kept me focused. If they had seen me in that moment, they might have felt genuine fear and dread. I had lost much of my humanity. My sole purpose now was to see them brought to justice. After enduring their actions for 45 minutes, I'd seen enough. It was halftime during the football game, and the halftime show had started. I switched the system to live assist mode and began replaying the recording of David and Emily from the beginning. Almost immediately, my phone began to ring incessantly. I ignored the calls and picked up my cell phone, dialing Emily's number. The ringing echoed through the monitors. Emily glanced at her phone and said, "It's him again. This time I won't answer. Let's see how he likes it." I hung up and dialed her number again. After a few moments, she answered, her voice tinged with irritation. "Hello?" she snapped. Curious about her whereabouts and intentions, I asked where she was and what she was doing. She explained she was out shopping since I hadn't called earlier, and she planned to grab some food before heading home. With a hint of sarcasm, I asked if she was shopping at the moment. She confirmed she was, mentioning she intended to spend a significant amount of money. I couldn't help but retort, "Thanks for being such a wonderful wife." Her response was swift and sharp. "Don't talk to me like that. I don't understand your recent behavior." She ended the call with another use of that term, "goodbye." But the real issue wasn't her vague farewell. It was David, in the motel room with her, as their activities appeared to be winding down. She was taking one last shot to cover her tracks, and I knew she wouldn't answer her cell phone again. I decided to interrupt their evening. I called the motel and reached Ryan. "Hey Ryan," I said, "aren't you watching Monday Night Football? You should be. Can you ring the Whirlpool suite for me?" After just 2 rings, he answered. "Hi David, can I speak to Emily?" When Emily came on the line, she questioned why I was calling. "Emily, here's the deal," I said, cutting straight to the point. "I know about your infidelity, and I'm well aware of where you are and what you're doing. I'm filing for divorce, and you'll be looking for a new place to stay. David might also face some consequences." She was clearly confused. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't understand your recent behavior. What's going on?" I kept my tone steady. "Emily, the charade is over. I suggest you turn on Monday Night Football and catch the halftime show. I'll see you later." With that, I hung up. I watched on the live monitor as she walked over to the TV and switched it on. Her reaction was immediate. "Oh my God, no!" she screamed when she saw the live feed of her and David's activities. The delay in the broadcast meant she was seeing a replay of what everyone else in Atlanta had already witnessed. Her response was a frantic, "Oh no!" as she scrambled to get dressed and flee the room. David, equally panicked, muttered curses under his breath. "I'll kick that son of a... I'll kick him." His angry outburst was something he might come to regret. Once they had vacated the room, I turned off the monitors and let the video stream run for another minute before switching the system back to fully automated broadcast mode. I retrieved the tape and left the broadcast booth, knowing it might be my last visit there. I took a few personal items from my desk as a final gesture. I spent the rest of the night at Charlie's, and unsurprisingly, my performance during halftime became the hot topic at the bar. After the game ended, I hailed a cab and headed home. When I arrived, I found Emily sitting alone in the darkened living room. The phone had been disconnected, and it was clear she had been crying uncontrollably. Her tears didn't sway me. As far as I was concerned, it was all over. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes and asked, "How could you do this to me after all these years?" I responded firmly, "No, Emily. The real question is, how could you do this to me?" I was drunk and exhausted. "I'm going to bed." "Emily, well, talk tomorrow," I said as I left her on the sofa and retreated to the spare bedroom. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding hangover. Emily was still on the couch, dark circles under her eyes revealing she hadn't slept a wink. But frankly, I couldn't bring myself to care. She had brought this upon herself. I picked up the phone, which immediately began to ring off the hook. For the next hour and a half, I fielded calls from family members, including her parents, friends, church acquaintances, my now ex-boss, and both of my daughters. They were all deeply shaken by what they had witnessed, and nothing I said could offer them much solace. I understood their distress. It was harsh to see such a thing, but they were adults and would eventually come to terms with it. Mrs. David called as well, asking if I had kept a tape of the incident. I assured her I had a copy securely stored, and would provide it if she needed it. It was clear that everyone I had contacted had seen the Monday Night Football halftime show. Reactions varied. Some were angry about the explicit content, while others, like Emily's parents, thought my actions were cruel for exposing her like that. However, most people were sympathetic and understood my perspective. It was a grueling ordeal, but it was the price I had to pay for exposing the truth. Emily remained seated, sobbing uncontrollably throughout the morning. I eventually left the phone off the hook and went to make some coffee. When I returned, I offered her a cup and handed her the divorce papers along with the investment documents that needed her signature. "Emily," I began, "I'm filing for divorce. After discovering your infidelity and witnessing what I saw last night, it's clear you've been cheating on me for at least a year, if not longer. There's no way I can continue in this marriage." I held up the papers. "These are the divorce documents. If you read them, you'll see him requesting a no-fault divorce and proposing an equal division of our assets. To proceed, you need to sign both the divorce agreement and the investment split agreement right now. There will be no negotiations or modifications to these documents. They are entirely fair. I'll give you until 5 p.m. today to consult with an attorney and verify that my offer is fair." At 3:51 p.m., I gave her a final warning. "If you haven't signed by 5 p.m., the deal is off the table, and I'll file for divorce on the grounds of adultery. I'll push for a property distribution that reflects our individual contributions, which will show that mine far outweighs yours, considering our respective incomes. Essentially, I'll pursue everything I can. This is the best deal you're going to get, so think it through carefully." I made it clear. It would be unwise to contest a divorce based on adultery, especially when the entire city will know the truth. Everyone will be aware of your infidelity. This is what you wanted. As you told David, your wish has been granted, and now everyone knows. Emily was desperate, pleading, "I love you, and I want to save our marriage. Can't we try to work this out?" I responded with finality. "That may be true, Emily, but it doesn't matter. Love is irrelevant now. Our marriage ended when you chose him over me, and that decision was made when you engaged in the affair with him. Now I suggest you freshen up and consult with an attorney. Time is running out." Later that afternoon, Emily came home with the papers. "My attorney recommends that I sign these papers," she said. "He believes you've made a fair offer given the circumstances, and thinks I should accept this settlement." She continued, "Can we talk? Can you listen to me and perhaps consider forgiveness and working together to salvage our marriage?" I agreed to sit down and listen. I genuinely wanted to understand why she had done what she did, and if this was the first time something like this had happened in our marriage. We sat at the kitchen table, and she began to explain everything. She confessed that there had been no other affairs before this one, that it had started shortly before she began working for David. "I don't really understand why," she admitted, "because I was completely happy with you. But something about David drew me in." As the sun began to rise on the morning following the broadcast, the weight of the previous night's events still hung heavily in the air. The protagonist, weary but resolute, surveyed the wreckage of his once stable life. The walls of his home, once filled with echoes of shared laughter and love, now felt hollow and cold. Emily's cries had faded into silence. Her pleas for reconciliation met with the finality of the divorce papers he had presented. Despite her attempts to salvage what was left of their marriage, it was clear that the foundation of trust had crumbled beyond repair. She had chosen her path, and the consequences were now fully apparent. The protagonist's decision to expose Emily and David's affair had not been made lightly. The sting operation, the broadcasted footage, and the subsequent fallout were all part of a carefully orchestrated plan to unveil the truth and secure his own future. Though the method of his revenge was extreme, it was driven by a deep sense of betrayal and a need for justice. The reactions from family, friends, and acquaintances had been mixed. Some were outraged by the public nature of the revelation, while others understood the protagonist's need for closure and retribution. The fallout was inevitable, but it was a price he was willing to pay. With the divorce papers signed and the legal matters set in motion, the protagonist began to reclaim his life. He took steps to ensure his financial stability and prepared for a future without Emily. The process of untangling their lives was arduous, but it was necessary for him to move forward. In the end, The protagonist's journey was one of painful self-discovery and resilience. He had faced the deepest betrayal imaginable and emerged from the experience with a clearer sense of his own strength and boundaries. While the scars of the past would remain, they were now a testament to his resolve and his refusal to accept a life built on lies. As he looked ahead, he knew that healing would take time. The wounds inflicted by Emily's betrayal were deep, but they would eventually scar over. His future was uncertain, but it was his to shape, free from the shadows of deceit and the chains of a broken marriage. In the quiet of his home, the protagonist found a semblance of peace, knowing that he had faced the truth, taken action, and ultimately reclaimed his life. The journey had been harrowing, but it had also been a testament to his endurance and his unwavering commitment to justice.